Hello, my name is Courtney and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be starting a very special reading vlog, which is a part of my seasonal reading vlog series, where I take a season and I try and figure out what kind of books are people reading for this season, what kind of books are people recommending for this season, how do people visualize and encapsulate a season through books. A lot of people are mood readers and a lot of people I feel like are seasonal readers, so I'm trying to boil this down and understand what the general populace feels and thinks during a season of reading. So I started out this reading vlog series with the infamous fall. I feel like it's definitely the season that probably has the most recommendation videos. It's a season that people just really like, especially, you know, the white Northwestern girlies. And I get it, it's a beautiful season. It's probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite season. And it has a lot to offer in terms of what kind of books get recommended. But if you want to hear more of my discoveries, go and check out the fall reading vlog. But today, it is January, and the day before my birthday. I am a winter baby. I am a Capricorn, so I love January. I like winter sports. I like winter time. Winter Olympics has always been my favorite. So winter is definitely up there for contenders of best season. I have since lived in places that actually snow, and I get that, you know, that gets tiring, shoveling snow, digging your car out. It's not always the most fun, but there still is a kind of magic around winter, and I think it goes unappreciated, and reading wintry books to me is so much fun. So winter to me, the kind of color associations I have with it are white, silver, blue, maybe a nice gray, and the kind of buzzwords I think about is cozy, cold, snow, isolation, darkness. You want to kind of curl up on a fire watching the winter snow pile up outside you. There is like this desolation, this harshness, this darkness to winter, but there's also like this magicalness to it as well. And the kinds of things that I think about when I think about winter is like cold, frostiness, mountains, my birthday, log cabin vibes. The kind of like scenes, books, and TV shows that I'm thinking about are like Lord of the Rings, the first movie where they're climbing the mountain, that one part in Beauty and the Beast where it is a like wintry scene where they're throwing snowballs at each other. I think of the show Hilda, which is a very cute middle grade show. I think of Avatar: The Last Airbender, especially the first season where most of it deals a lot with the water tribes, which are snowy kingdoms. I think of some scenes from Mushishi, which has some really beautiful snow episodes. Kind of captures that like darkness, but also the magicalness of snow. And then I have Yuri on Ice, which is an ice skating anime, and a lot of those final moments take place in winter. So that's the kind of things that I'm thinking about. So what are the kind of things that I think will show up in people's recommendation videos? I think we're going to see a lot of winter settings, a lot of time period novels, hopefully a lot of novels that take place in winter. I think we'll see a lot of adult fantasy, especially Eastern European settings. We'll see a lot of fairy tales, a lot of darker tones, a lot of larger books. It's adjacent to fall. There's a lot of things that are adjacent, but what we're missing is like the dark academia. For fall, I think palace. For winter, I think castle. For fall, I think of leaves and like a beautiful forest changing. And for winter, I think of like desolate woods where it's snowy and foggy and like frozen. There's a lot of similarities I feel like between winter and fall. The magic is harsher, it's more fairy tale, less school setting. And unlike fall, I actually have books that I think about when I think about winter. I have a whole list of things that I could recommend right now. So for me, winter books, we have the obvious. We have Spinning Silver. It takes place largely in a winter fantasy setting. It has the coldness, it has the fairy tales, it has like the darkness, the tone. Spinning Silver it's a winter book. It is most definitely a winter read. With that, we also have Winter's Orbit, which isn't my personal favorite, but if you're looking for a wintry snow setting, this is perfect. So many moments revolving around this snowy kingdom. Again, getting stuck in the mountains, but also like the city winter setting. Winter is in the title. It does have a wintry setting. We also have the Bear and the Nightingale series, which is a Eastern European fantasy setting, again like Spinning Silver, and it has that deep winter setting. It has the fairy tale-ness, it has the darker tones. It's a winter book. We also have Girls Made of Snow and Glass, which again wasn't my favorite book, but it did so many things right for me. Again, it takes place in a wintry kingdom. It is always going to be snowy in this one location, which is where the story takes place. There's so many dark fairy tale moments, dark scenes. That that book really captures the winter vibes. We also have Burial Rites, which is a historical fiction book taking place in Iceland during a winter. Again, it has that winter setting, but it also has like the dark tones. It is dealing with a woman who is going to be put to death at the end of winter. So it's like a slow reveal of character and what they did. Another read I have is When the Tiger Comes Down the Mountain. This book specifically in the Singing Hills series takes place during, I believe, like a winter moment where the main character is trapped with tigers in a like barn during winter. So again, there's like that fairy tale, there's the storytelling aspect, there's the isolation, there's a sense of danger. Those are like my main wintry books, but there's also a lot of other books that have winter settings. We have Winterkeep, which is a part of the Graceling Realm series. Winterkeep has a winter setting. We have City of Thieves, which is a historical fiction book. Our two main characters are traveling through the snow in, I believe, Russia. Game of Thrones, the whole big threat in that series is like a winter that is coming. All the light we cannot see. I remember there's some specific scenes that happen in like a deep winter, and it has like that historical fiction aspect as well again. Magic, which is the first book in the Septimus Heap series, I remember there's a really big like winter moment scene that like sticks very clearly in my mind. And there's also a lot of classics that have to deal with winter. Call of the Wild and White Fang. There's Brian's Winter, which is a part of the Hatchet series. There's My Side of the Mountain, which has a lot of big wintry moments. There's the Golden Compass series, as well as The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, very much associated with winter. There's a lot of books that have this like winter setting along with like the historical or the fairy tale aspects, the darker tone, and the sense of danger. This is the season where I feel like I understand what to recommend, and I could easily recommend a bunch of books with a winter setting with those kind of vibes. But there's also a lot of books that are not strictly winter that I feel like fall into the winter feelings. For instance, the Lunar Chronicles, I think there are some wintry scenes, but again, it also just has like the fairy tale aspect to it. The Broken Earth series, I don't believe there's snow, I believe it's ash falling down, but again, it's darker in tone, it's a thick, chunky series. It's very character driven, very slow. We have Icebreakers, which kind of takes place fall to winter, but it has hockey in it, so it reminds me of winter. We have Spinning by Tilly Walden, which again is ice skating, but it kind of captures that like lonely, desolate feeling really well, so it kind of reminds me of like a winter book. Check Please, again, is a hockey webcomic series, so a lot of it does take place during the hockey season, which is winter. The Every Heart a Doorway series, I don't believe there are any specific wintry moments, but it has like the dark fairy tale, the sense of danger. It fits kind of in there with that kind of stuff. And I would even recommend Girl of Fire and Thorns. The second book does have a lot of wintry, mountainy moments, but again, there's like the dark fairy tale-ish kind of aspect to it. There's a lot of feelings of winter in those books. So going into my fall video, I wanted to discover. I didn't know what made a fall book. I had some ideas, but I didn't have anything on my shelf that was really popping out to me as fall. So for winter, I feel like I'm an expert, and I'm going to be judging people on their winter recommendations. And with that, I feel like there are going to be some problems that might arise. So for instance, I feel like a lot of the videos I'm going to encounter are going to be Christmas or holiday romance books, which is not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for winter divorced of Christmas and holiday. If there are scenes of like winter solstice and like pagan holidays, I feel like that can get away with it. But I do not want Christmas or holiday. The other thing I think we're gonna get is a lot of Eastern European fantasy, which is good. I like those books, but I just feel like the winter fantasy is going to skew very, very white, and we're not going to get a lot of diversity from the recommendations. I especially don't think we're going to see a lot of brown and black fantasy novels. The other problem I think we're going to have is that it's going to be too cozy and we're not going to get that winter setting. Like, I get it. We want to all curl up in front of the fireplace with a mug of tea or hot cocoa and enjoy a big, thick tome and like feel cozy and snuggly, but I'm not looking for necessarily cozy and snuggly right now. I want to feel that way, but when I'm reading the book, I want it to be desolate and harsh and a sense of danger. I want that winter setting. I don't want it to just be cozy. I want a wintry book. Problem I know I'm going to run into, because I've already done all this research, is I think I'm going to not be able to find enough videos. Because if we go back to my first problem, yes, there were a lot of videos that were recommended, that were titled winter recommendations, and you know what it was? It was Christmassy romance. romance, or it was wintry romance, and that's not the vibe. That is not the vibe we're looking for. So I compiled about 16 videos and I whittled it down to 10 to use because 6 of those were not relevant. So there's definitely a lot less books that we're taking from this time around. I think in my last video I had like 15, 12. I had a lot more people that were recommending books, and they were also recommending a lot more books. I think I had like 142, and this time around I only had 68 recommendations. Yes, we did see some repeats from some lists, which is good. That helps us narrow down what I'm going to read, but I am definitely picking from a smaller pool. So in an attempt to kind of balance this, I was watching some TikToks and looking up some blogs, and also putting on some of my recommendations for the list of things that I wanted to read that had like the winteriness that I was looking for. So I forgot to do a clip of discussing the buzzwords that I saw in recommendation videos, so here is the chart of that. So let's discuss what people recommended first. Again, I had about 68 different books across 10 different creators, and the ones that were appearing multiple times ended up being these ones. So for the ones that were recommended twice or more, I have The Bear and the Nightingale, A Winter's Promise, No Exit, The Shadow of the Gods, One by One, Murder on the Orient Express, and The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Once again, I cannot escape her. And for books that were recommended more than once or 3 times, we have Spinning Silver, The Goblin Emperor, and Six of Crows. So if we look at the fantasy, it is all Eastern European and maybe a little bit of a Scandinavian setting, so it definitely skewed the way I thought it was going to. And as for the other genres that we're seeing, it's a lot of mystery thrillers and a little bit of historical fiction. So of the ones that were recommended more than once, I have read The Bear and the Nightingale and Spinning Silver, so those are not options for me. I should add that all of the books in this list are listed from my most want to read to my least want to read. So Spinning Silver and The Bear and the Nightingale are obviously books that I've already read, so they don't really count. But the rest of them are ordered in the way I would want to read them. So for instance, Winter's Promise is the most promising or interesting to me, and then The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue I have absolutely no interest in. The Goblin Emperor I think is interesting, and I think I've put it on my reading list before. Six of Crows I really don't have any interest in reading, but it's a maybe. And then of the books that I have actually read from the recommendation list, here are all of those books, and I ordered them from what I feel is the most wintry to the least wintry. So again, I've read Spinning Silver and The Bear and the Nightingale. Those are both equally very wintry books. Girls Made of Snow and Glass and Burial Rites, very wintry. Little Women, it does have some winteriness, but again, it is a little more Christmassy winter, but I put it pretty high. I feel like it has the winter vibes. Anna Karenina, it happens in Russia. Snow, winter, yes, it makes sense. Legends and Lattes is up there pretty high. I would say it's like middle of the road wintry. I think it skews more fall for that more like cozy fall kind of feeling, but I get why you would want to read it during this time as well. We also have The Final Empire, which again is a big fantasy tome with darker moments. There's like ash falling from the sky that kind of mimics snow. There's cold, darkness, desolation. I feel like it's a very good recommendation. Next we have Heartstopper, which I wouldn't consider a wintry series. I feel like it's more spring-summer series, maybe even a little bit of fall with the leaves, but there is that one wintry scene where they are in the snow, like making snow angels and stuff. So I guess like I get it. There's a wintry scene at least, but the feeling of the series is not wintry. Station 11, I would consider this a fall series in my opinion, but I think what they're doing in the book, if I remember correctly, is the troupe is going around trying to do all of their scheduled stuff before winter happens. So I'm not sure if winter does hit them, if they get a little bit of winter or not, but I guess this is a good transition book from fall to winter. Strange the Dreamer, I just hate this book. I just don't like this series, but would I consider it a wintry book? No, it definitely reads very fall to me. The Hobbit, again, I think of the first Lord of the Rings book more than The Hobbit. The Hobbit feels very like summery and like jovial and fun to me. There aren't any wintry scenes that I can remember. I think they went around the mountains too, so I don't think there's any like harsh winter moments. And then we have A Psalm for the Wild Built, which to me definitely spring summer vibes. Like no, this is like eco-friendly future, lots of nature, lots of in the forest. This is not a wintry book. And then Circe by Madeline Miller, again, a very summery read to me. It happens like in Greece. Yes, there's like the historical fiction. Yes, it's both cozy and desolate, but the book just reads summer islandy beachy to me just because of like the setting. So this is kind of the wide range of stuff we're getting. We're getting historical, we're getting thriller, and we're getting literary fiction, and we're getting fantasy. Some of those to me have the vibes of winter and some of them do not. So let's take a look at what I picked from the list as contenders for what I'm going to read for this vlog. So I have A Winter's Promise. This again is from the list of books that was recommended more than once. I initially always wanted to read this series. It happens on these like floating turrets. Again, it's a wintry, dark, fairy tale-esque type vibe with an arranged marriage. It definitely ticks off a lot of fantasy boxes, especially YA fantasy boxes that I look for. But I heard some weird things about the third book, that there was like, I believe it was, I want to say ableism in it, or like something that was just like really weird, either because of the translation or because it just like was really off-putting. But then that creator kept reading those books when they said that they wouldn't read them anymore because of that. And now they talk about them like everything's fine. So I don't know. I took that off my reading list for those reasons. So I kind of just want to read them now and see for myself, especially because I had this on my reading list for a really long time. Next, we have The Goblin Emperor. This is a big fantasy novel with a lot of political intrigue. Definitely fits the winter vibes to me. Six of Crows. I've never really had any interest in this series. It's definitely been pushed and recommended to me forever, basically since it came out. I'm willing to read the Six of Crows duology just because it's a duology, because I won't have to read anything else in the series if I don't want to. And again, it was one of those ones that was recommended multiple times. And of the ones that were recommended more than 3 times, it is the one that I'm more interested in. So The Wolf of the Woodsman, this was recommended once, but it is something I'm really interested in. Jade City was recommended once, but again, it's on my TBR, I'm interested in it. This is the same for The Sword of Kaigen. The Mercies and The Witch's Heart, I believe, are like Scandinavian Viking type settings. Both are like literary fiction with like fantasy elements. They're both things that I've been interested in before. The Traitor of Haru Cormorant, another one that I've been interested in. Beartown, another one I've been interested in. Gives us some more literary fiction type or just regular fiction type vibe. The Light from Common Stars popped up again, which again is a book I want to read. Ice Planet Barbarians. I wouldn't say I really had that much interest in it, but I thought it was really funny when it popped up, and it is giving that wintry setting, so it intrigues me for this video. So those two top rows were all books that were on the recommendation list, and I was in some way interested in them, so I added them to this reading list as contenders. And then this final row is all books that I have added through research or through desire to read them. So we have Among the Beasts and Briars by, oh, I didn't realize this was by Ashley Poston. Interesting. I've seen this on some recommendations for fantasy type wintry vibes, so maybe The Snow Child, literary fiction, maybe some type of fantastical in there. The Winter Duke, again, another one that has winter in the title. But I believe this is sapphic, so that's what it really interests me. Moon of the Crested Snow, I believe, is sci-fi literary, dystopian literary, with like thriller aspects. No Exit would have ended up on this list, and it could still be very well read. Honestly, I should have put that one on here too. But if I'm going to read one thriller for this vlog, I personally would rather read Moon of the Crested Snow. It's a book that's been on my TBR, a book that I've wanted to read, and it also adds some more diversity, which again, this wintry TBR definitely needs. And then the last 2 books are Winterwood, again, winter in the title, Winter Forest, and then For the Wolf, which has a very wintry cover, and I saw on a lot of recommendations for wintry fantasy. It's really hard because again, there's a lot that I want to read on here, so I feel like A Winter's Promise, The Snow Child, Moon of the Crested Snow, and Beartown would make a really good TBR. We have literary fiction, fantastical, and thriller-ish, mystery thriller-ish type vibes. That would be the most well-rounded list, but we'll see how this goes. Let's see what I buy and then we'll get to the reading. So I've been very late in updating, basically being a bad vlogger. What can I do? I almost act like it's my job to be a bad vlogger, but anyway, let us discuss A Winter's Promise. So A Winter's Promise is the first book I picked up for my winter reading challenge. I decided it was a good pick because it had been recommended in some lists, but also it was something at one time I was interested in. It's YA fantasy, and the name suggests that it's going to have a wintry setting, which it does. So A Winter's Promise is a Belgian YA novel that was written in 2013, and then it was since translated, and now it's being printed in the US. It follows a young girl named Ophelia who has been kind of hounded by her town and her family to get married like all the other women do. She hasn't really been interested in that, but now she is in an arranged marriage with a man from a different city, and there's kind of no way to get out of it at this point. And the thing that's special or fantastical about these cities is that the whole world is basically broken up into these floating citadels, and each citadel has its own political structure, its own culture, and each like family on these different citadels has their own set of powers. So on Ophelia's citadel, basically most people that have powers are readers, which means they can read objects, and there's a lot of different little offset powers that go along with this. For instance, there's a character who can fix pages and paper, and our main character Ophelia can walk through mirrors, and so she is getting into this arranged marriage. She doesn't want it, and the person that she's getting arranged marriage to also doesn't seem to want to be in an arranged marriage with her. So there is a lot of battling between the two. There's also just a lot of magical charm. Again, there's these citadels, all these magic structures. Ophelia is kind of like a grumpy cat-like person. She has like a little scarf that follows her around and is sentient, and this world is almost steampunk Victorian-esque. So there's a lot that is very charming and fun about this series. And this first book really just introduces us to the world, to the new setting that Ophelia is entering into, the new relationship dynamic she's entering into, and just like the political strife and kind of the big problem or the big bad that you're going to see throughout the entire series. So this book is like very slow, it's very character focused on Ophelia, and I would say that's the main issue with this book, is that it is a very character-focused series, but it's not a very character-driven series. Ophelia as a character is very like observant and closed off, and personally that's something I love in a main character. It just feels very refreshing and very different. I love when a character is very smart and very talented, but is kind of seen by the world as like a dullard and has to navigate through powers and political intrigue in a different way than other people would. But the problem is that there's very little of Ophelia using her powers for her own benefit, or even just like her love of like history and learning. She is just a very stagnant character in this book, a very passive character in this book, which makes, again, for a interesting setup to a series because we get to see her growth throughout the entire series, hopefully. But this first book, for me, just didn't have enough of that character development, that character arc. And because Ophelia has these powers of like, knowledge is her power, basically, she has ways that she can get like reconnaissance and observance, like those are her big personality traits and her special talents. I kind of wish that she had done more of that kind of stuff. It's a lot of her just having things happen to her, and even if the whole point of this series is that she's kind of getting thrown around and doesn't really have any control over her existence, I wish there was more of her like using her mirror ability to listen in on conversations, more of her observance that she uses to get out of situations, just more of her learning and reading books and trying to figure out the kind of world she's living into. But because she is so resistant to her marriage, she just doesn't do anything. She just kind of lets things happen to her. And so a lot of, especially the middle portion of this book, was just a little bit frustrating because I'm like waiting for this character to use her skills in some interesting way, waiting for her to grow as a character, and it just didn't happen as much as I was hoping to by the end of this book. So by the end of this novel, like, the characters have already sort of warmed up a little bit to each other. There is like a moment where it feels like Ophelia is taking a stand at the end of this book, you know, defeating like part of the big bad. But honestly, I don't feel like there was enough character development to like support those kind of like ending conclusions of this first novel. I wish we had just gone a little bit more of her struggling and fighting against stuff for those ending kind of realizations and things to feel satisfactory and to feel like it was opening up to a bigger story of her growing as a person and for this relationship to be growing. And the other big thing about this book is the themes. So like, this is set in like a misogynistic society. The character is obviously struggling and going against gender roles. There's even some sections where she is dressing up or disguising herself as a man, so there's a lot of, you know, that could be said about gender in this book. And the book doesn't really play into any of those things. It's more just a backdrop to the problems, which was just really frustrating. Why give us a misogynistic society that Ophelia has to navigate? Like, why give us these gender roles that she has to struggle against if you're not going going to say anything more about them than just having them as like a plot obstacle, you know? For me, I really like fantasy when it has to deal with those kind of things, but I want it to actually say something or have the character fight against something. There was no kind of nuance. It was very much just like an obstacle Ophelia was facing without any kind of thought behind those systems of oppression. And then my biggest like gripe with this series is that the translation, a lot of it comes off kind of stilted, very posh, and I feel like it works really well into the story because we are in like this steampunky, Victorian, eclectic type of fantasy setting. But there were just a lot of word choices that were like overly harsh or just didn't really feel right. A lot of stuff that like felt like it was missing. The male love interest tallness was repeated throughout the story. Continually, we just heard about his tallness all the time and how big he is. There were like moments in the scene where I was like, wait, when did that door open? Wait, why is Ophelia coming to the conclusion that the male love interest loves her? Like, where are we getting this from? And so it felt like things were like missing in the story. And so I don't know if that's a translation thing or not. But again, there just were other translation things where I'm like, that seems like not the right word choice for that. So that's to say is that I had a lot of complicated feelings about this. I enjoyed like the setup. I like the characters. There's a lot going for this series that's intriguing to me, but there were also things that I didn't necessarily like the execution. This is written in 2013 and definitely I could feel a little bit of that. I don't care if a main character doesn't like girly things, if they don't like to wear dresses or whatever. To me, that does not make a pick me or a not like other girls character. What makes the not like other girls character is a character who thinks they're better than other girls because they don't like those things. Because there are many women throughout the world who do not want to dress feminine or like a lot of feminine hobbies, but it doesn't mean they're looking down on other girls for liking those hobbies. And there's a little bit of her not liking other girls or not getting along with other women because she does not have the same interests as them. So that's more my problem with Ophelia. And the other thing I have a problem with is that she's entering into this new society and instantly all these like young men are like attracted to her because she's so different than other people that they've met. Those are the two main red flags for me. Not that the girl doesn't like feminine things or dressing a certain way. To me, that can say something more interesting about gender and sexuality, but it's when the girl starts to look down on other girls and starts to gain the affection of other characters because of their differentness. It wasn't like super blatant, but there was definitely like a little like, yellow flag being raised. So overall, I gave this a 3 stars. Very complicated feelings about it. Like some things, don't like some other things. But I think I would continue with the series. I'm intrigued enough and I like the world and the characters enough that I want to see how their story goes. But going to the winter challenge, is this a wintry book? I would say yes. This is a character focused story. It's slow paced. It's a longer book. It is fantasy, but it has some like literary-ness to it. This almost feels like House Moving Castle, but like wintry, if that makes sense. It kind of has like the same or some similar vibes as the House Moving Castle book. It definitely feels like there was some inspiration from House Moving Castle from this author. In the book itself, we are getting a harsh winter landscape. We're getting a lot of scenic detail about like the cold and the setting. So yes, there is that wintry aspect. There is the wintry fantasy setting, but outside of the setting itself, there is the harshness. Ophelia is very isolated. It is a very like poisonous, toxic society, very dangerous, and we feel the character in danger. So there is like the isolation, the darkness, the grittiness that I'm expecting or wanting from like a more winter fantasy. I expected to be a little more cutthroat, and this definitely gave me that kind of feeling. So yes, if we're rating this out of 5 snowflakes, I would say this is like 4 snowflake. It's very wintry, gives you the winter vibes. Maybe it's not my perfect book, but definitely very strong winter vibes. Maybe even a 5 out of 5. And because I'm so late in filming this, I also have the next book that I read, which is Moon of the Crusted Snow, which is by Waboguchi Rice. So Moon of the Crusted Snow is a dystopian, literary, slightly mystery thriller-ish novel, and it is a very short novel, which is why I already finished it. It was a very quick read for me and I read it in a day. But Moon of the Crusted Snow is basically set within an Anishinaabe community, mainly focused on one man and his family. But basically the power goes out. It is just the start of winter, so it is not really a surprise for this community. Their power goes out, their electricity, their Wi-Fi goes out a lot, and it's something that is expected. So this community is, I wouldn't say enjoying it, but it's kind of like they're reflecting and they're like, oh yeah, this is how it used to be, this is how our community has always survived, and it's giving us the opportunity to be closer with our family and with our roots. But they slowly start to realize, as they're shut off from the rest of the world, that the rest of the world has gone dark as well, and there's something else that's going on. They're not getting their shipments of food coming in, they are not able to get in contact with people that are on the outside world, and things start to look very grim as they're heading into a very harsh winter without the supplies that they need. And so this is like a survival story, and it has like slight dystopian vibes. We know eventually that something dystopian is happening, but we don't know exactly what it is. But yes, something is going on outside this community, but it's really about the community, if they're able to come together or not and face this winter where they're basically in isolation. And I really enjoyed this. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. It had everything I wanted: the literariness, the mystery thriller suspense to keep you on edge. And what is really interesting about this novel is that it's almost like a third-person omniscient. We are kind of bouncing around between a bunch of different characters. We're mainly focused in on our main character, but there is like a sense of community as we kind of pop around to different characters. And the other interesting thing about this book is like how the scenes are broken up. So you will get one scene and then skip a few weeks or couple days or whatever, and you're getting the next scene and like seeing the outcome of the things that have happened. And I really liked it. It really worked for this novel to have that kind of broken upness, to kind of have those gaps in times between the different big events that were happening. I would have loved if it was longer and like went into more detail about them surviving day to day, but these kind of big snapshot scenes worked really well, especially keeping that tension line through the story and keeping us like engaged as things came to a head. And when I heard about this novel, I thought it was just like about a small family living together and surviving winter. I didn't realize like it was a whole community, and I think that was like one of the strongest aspects, was just like seeing this community come together and then kind of break apart in certain places. And so yeah, it was a really good book. So as far as wintry, does it fit the wintry vibes? It's got the literariness, it's got the mystery thriller aspect that a lot of suggestions were giving. I don't really understand why this book wasn't recommended more as a wintry book. I guess it's just because not a lot of people have read it, but it definitely gave me those overarching things that I'm looking for in a winter book: slow paced, character driven, tension. And then as far as like the details, yes, it's set during winter, so it has the wintry vibe. There's isolation, desolation, a lot of scenic detail and scenic specificity. With the community, there is like some coziness in there as well, and like the connection people have to each other, but there's also just like the harshness, the danger, the cutthroatness. So yes, this is definitely like a 5 out of 5 or a 4.5 out of 5 wintry book. It has the wintriness. And so as someone who tends to think of wintry books as mainly fantasy, this is definitely a good option to pick up for something that's more contemporary, more in the real world. So going forward, what am I reading? So I wanted something that was more adult fantasy, something darker, something grittier. And so I picked up The Wolf and the Woodsman by Ava Reid. I've been wanting to read this book. I was glad that it was recommended, or is this one I snuck on? I can't remember. I think it was recommended. It's one I wanted to read for my fall reading vlog, but now getting into it, I'm about 100 pages into it. It's definitely wintry, but I also made a little bit of an oopsie, and this is a Harper Voyager title. But if you don't know, HarperCollins is on strike. The union is trying to fight for their employees' rights right now, and so they have asked us to not leave reviews for their books. They've asked us to keep buying the books to support the authors, but not to review them. And so I've had a couple reading vlogs over the past like month and a half of this strike where I've been reading HarperCollins titles, and so I've really been struggling with not reviewing them. So I'm really trying to decide if I don't want to include this or not. But at the same time, I do think it's almost better to include it because, you know, we can talk about the strike and I can inform more people about it that way. But if you don't know, just a basic summary, this is a adult fantasy novel that is set in a historical Hungarian Slavic inspired setting. Our main character is a pagan girl from a small town who doesn't have any magic powers when she should, and she is basically sold off to a woodsman who are basically kind of like these mercenaries for the kingdom, which is kind of like a stand-in for a Christian community. These girls are taken by the woodsman and taken to the king, and nobody knows what happens to them. They're expecting probably bad things because they are pagans and they are kind of villainized by the Christian-like community, but they don't really know what happens. So like I said, I don't want to review this obviously because I am supporting the Union, but I will say this is gritty. It has the wintry vibes. It has the winter setting. It has like the darkness, the high tension romance that I'm kind of expecting or wanting from a wintry read. It is giving me what I was kind of hoping more for in A Winter's Promise, but I will finish that book and get back to you on that, and maybe we will pick up another book to kind of replace that review. But my final book for this vlog is going to be, as of now, Beartown by Fredrik Backman. This is set in Sweden during winter, during hockey season. It's a literary fiction story, and I'm pretty sure it's like this town is going to have a hockey tournament or be in a hockey tournament, which is supposed to change this small town's life. But there have been some sexual assaults by the hockey team to other members of the community. I think that's what this book is about. And like A Winter's Promise, this is also translated, so I'm very interested to see how that turns out. But yes, this is going to fill in more the literary side of things and hopefully give us that slow-paced, character-driven story that I'm looking for in a wintry book. I will get back to reading and we will discuss. So I just finished filming my wrap-up for the month, and we need to talk about The Wolf and the Woodsman. I don't want to give too much of my thoughts and opinions because, again, of the union strike, but this is a really spectacular debut. I have complicated feelings about certain things in my reading experience, but overall, this will give you the gritty winter fantasy vibes if that's what you're looking for. It definitely fits the bill for that. And I talked about this in my wrap-up. I did not realize how much this story would mean to me as a person whose grandmother was a child of Hungarian immigrants and never really got the culture passed down. Reading this book really meant a lot to me, which I just didn't think it would, or I just didn't want to hope that it would, but it has a lot of fairy tales, a lot of the food and history is a lot about connection and about roots. This just was really comforting to read from that aspect. But yes, I would say the best way to describe this is that it reminded me a lot of The Bear and the Nightingale in some respects. The tone, the vibes, a lot of the setup, but it was like everything that happened in Wolf of the Woodsman like really squished down into one book, and there's good and bad parts to doing that. This isn't a complete ripoff of that series. I don't want to say it is. It's like a different history, a different culture, different in a lot of respects, but very similar vibes just as a standalone versus a series. And with that, I think it's time to get into the final book of this series, which is going to be Beartown by Fredrik Backman, which is a Swedish translated novel that, again, is in an isolated small town with a wintry setting because the main sport that they're talking about is hockey. So it is finally time to talk about our final book of the winter reading vlog, which is Beartown. So I finished this yesterday or the day before, I believe, and I've been just kind of sitting and ruminating with it. So Beartown is a literary fiction contemporary story basically about this town, Beartown, and this community is really built around hockey, and they're all hoping and praying that they finally win this big hockey tournament for their juniors team because they hope it'll revitalize the town. So we're following a couple different members of the hockey team, and then the general manager of the hockey team, and the different coaches, and just different members of this community, and we're following the time of them going to the semifinals. And then the big event that happens is that somebody in the community, a young woman, is raped by one of the members of the hockey team, and kind of the community's response to that event and like everything that happens surrounding that. The sexual assault happens like midway through the book, so it might be seen as like a spoiler, but like it's a pretty big event and it's a pretty triggering event for a lot of readers, so I do want to mention that like that is a big part of the novel, and there is a on-page sexual assault scene. I don't think it's too graphic. It is very heart-wrenching to read. Like, it is definitely like there, and you know, you're getting details. So, you know, just making that clear. It's kind of up to your discretion how you feel about that scene. And yeah, so this book takes place in Sweden during the hockey season, so it's very wintry. The town is very wintry. There's lots of scenic descriptions of ice and the forest. Particularly the forest, I think, is a really big thing in this novel. And just kind of the isolated, desolate, rundown town is a really big part of this novel as well. And I would say for like the first third of this novel, I was really, really enjoying it. It's slow paced, but it is so incredibly well done about how we follow the characters through this single day almost, leading up to that semifinals and then the party after the semifinals. I could not tell this was a translated novel. It just was beautifully written, just such beautiful description, such careful character work. This novel is on the line with so many things because, you know, again, it's showing a sexual assault scene, showing the inside of characters that are perpetrators, but also people that not believing the rape victim. So it's really difficult because it's like showing all these different perspectives and that you don't necessarily want to sit with. And it got me thinking a lot about, like, were these perspectives necessarily? Do we need to read from these perspectives? Do we need to give every single side the chance to speak? Is that necessary? Kind of a thing in a narrative. And I think that's still something I'm ruminating on, but I do believe that Fredrik Backman was very careful with everything that he put in here, and there were a couple moments that brought some nuance to the situation and I think helped kind of counterbalance some of the awful things that we had to read. The other thing that I really like about Fredrik Backman is that he feels like a cameraman. You are zooming in and out of different characters, and he is very careful about showing you what he wants to show you. I wouldn't say it feels like the author's holding your hand, but it's just like very direct of like, that I'm the author, I'm going to be taking you through these moments and showing you what I want to show you kind of a thing. It feels almost like a documentarian or just like somebody with a big camera that is like taking you through the shots. And I really like that style because it just feels like I can really feel and see the craft of the author. Again, it's just very clear that he's very careful about every single scene that he wants to show you. It feels like everything is really, really thought out about what he wants to show you. And so at the end, it's like you're not necessarily pulling for certain characters or sympathizing with them. And it's not even that they're bringing nuance to the situation, but just ends up feeling like a real situation. He's showing the real responses that people have to it. And one thing that I think really, really helped with the telling of the story is that when the perpetrator commits the act, afterward, we stay relatively far out of his perspective, even when we do dip into his point of view. Like, we are very far away from that, and we don't really necessarily feel his feelings other than like his guilt and shame. Like, we don't really get like a deep inner perspective that we had beforehand. So I think that was a really good choice because we don't necessarily need to sympathize or see why he did the thing that he did. So I think that was obviously a very particular choice that Fredrik Backman was making that helped me trust all of his other decisions. So the only thing that I would say that I didn't love about this novel is like the middle third of it. There were definitely scenes that I feel like could have been taken out or could have been condensed. The slow, tedious pace of the first third I think was really good in like setting up the community and like really slowly driving up the tension and giving us really great atmosphere. But once the event had already happened, there were just like a lot of moments that I don't feel like we're really building towards much. And there were definitely scenes towards the end that I really, really enjoyed and really liked. But yeah, there was definitely a middle third that I was like kind of slogging through and like, okay, we get it. We can get to the next thing. We can get to the conclusion. But overall, I'm giving this a 4 out of 5 stars. I really, really enjoyed it as much as you can kind of enjoy this kind of story, but it was excellently crafted. And this is a series. I'm not super interested in continuing the series, to be honest. I feel like this is a very conclusive thing. It concluded. This feels like it can be a standalone novel, and I think it was for a while. And to be honest, I'm not super interested in other books by Fredrik Backman, but I can wholeheartedly recommend him as a author. That's hard to say, not having read the rest of his books, but when I work in a bookstore, I could be like, hey, I've read one of his books. I would definitely recommend him as an author. He did a really good job with this one. Pick whatever one suits your fancy. But yes, this was my final read for my winter reading vlog. As far as the wintry aspect, we had the coldness coldness, the desolation, the isolation, the darker tone and themes, the very careful character work, the very slow pace. It fit into everything that I was thinking of for a literary winter read, as well as like that wintry setting and winter atmosphere. So this definitely fits into the prompt, and it's definitely one I would recommend for winter. So I think we're going to conclude the reading vlog here. I read a dystopian literary fiction, I read a contemporary literary fiction, a adult fantasy, and a YA fantasy. These were the 3 books that were recommended by other readers, and this one was a substitute that I made for a book for the thriller literary category that I kept seeing pop up in suggestions. And I think that everybody really understands what a winter book is. All 4 of these had a wintry setting, and not only that, they had the kind of book that I think of when I think of a winter book. Slow-paced, character-focused, a specific type of tone, themes of isolation, and just like a harshness of the world. And so everybody did a really good job recommending books, which is really interesting because we didn't have that many videos to choose from. It was definitely a lot harder to find winter recommendation videos, and I haven't even seen anybody, at least that I follow, put out any new winter recommendation videos for this year. Most people seem to understand what a winter book entails, what people are looking for, but they don't tend to make a lot of those videos. That could be in part because Christmas and the holidays and January wrap-up kind of stuff, because people are just not having the time for those type of videos. But I think it also could be in due to part that this isn't everybody's favorite season, and it also is like a season that has very obvious book choices. This was a really interesting reading vlog because I've already given my recommendations of books that I thought of when I think of wintry books. I personally feel like I know what a winter read is and can clearly define it, and I feel like the community, while they don't put out videos for it, they know what a winter book is, and they do give good recommendations for winter reads. And I'm left with a list of books that I'm still interested in reading, a lot of good books that have been on my TBR that I've been interested in, so maybe that's something for me to look at and to continue reading into this next year. But going forward, we have spring to look forward to, which I think is going to be fun because spring is again a season that I feel a little iffy on of what I would personally recommend. Anxious to see what others would recommend for the season. But yes, let me know what you think of when you think of a winter title. Let me know some of your recommendations, and also let me know, what are you thinking for spring? What do people recommend? What do people read? Any guesses? What would you recommend? But thank you so much for watching this reading vlog. I'll see you guys later, and happy reading.